At the center of the universe, at the border between the light and the dark, stands Castle Grayskull. For countless ages, the sorceress of Grayskull has kept this universe in harmony. But the armies of darkness do not rest, and the capture of Grayskull is evermost in their minds. For to those that control Grayskull will come the power. The power to be supreme, the power to be almighty, the power to be masters of the universe.
The war is over. My forces are victorious. The sorceress of Grayskull is my prisoner, and her powers are now joined with mine. Let this be my first decree. Those who do not pledge themselves to me shall be destroyed. Kill him!
Masters of the Universe is definitely a mixed bag of memories for me as a movie. This 80s adaptation of the much maligned and much loved original cartoon series He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is visually stunning, no doubt, and the music by Bill Conti is an uplifting score to an otherwise mediocre and poorly conceived movie. Oh, that it ranks as a good old-fashioned 1980s fare isn't the issue. It's enjoyable if you don't take it too seriously, but ultimately disappointing is both in its execution and concept if examined too closely, which sadly is a major flaw of my own. Trust me, I don't intend to be kind on this movie, but I will give credit where credit is due, all failings aside. So, what did director Gar Goddard and writer David Odell have to work with? And given what they eventually released, could they really be given a pass on the final product? Now, I will confess to He-Man being a rather guilty pleasure of mine as a child. For the longest time I was banned from watching it, thanks to religious parents influenced largely by the paranoid tracks of Jack Trick, who today still insists that Pokemon is the work of the devil. I watched it anyway, not sure why to be honest. Even as a kid I found it largely unentertaining and needlessly over the top in its moral messages. I guess as a kid I watched it to be a revel, which is kind of ironic given the limitations of what was obviously a kids show. The heroes were as goody two-shoes as they came, and the villains were as ever not too bright in the grand scheme of things. If these were truly the masters of the universe, then we were pretty fucked in the long run. And oh my god, were the moral lessons just so fucking black and white? Throwing the gay overtones aside, which, believe me, writing this review provided me with many opportunities and temptations to throw them in here, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe remains an oddity for me to comprehend in an age where Transformers and G.I. Joe rule the roost. This show somehow managed to maintain a care-bear approach to an otherwise prepubescent testosterone action-driven medium. That it survived at all, much less made it to the silver screen before G.I. Joe and Transformers as a live-action medium, remains as much of a mystery to me now as it did back then. So, there is the foundation for the movie. Mediocre heroes, bumbling villains, and a lukewarm action motif. Not really much to work with to make an epic blockbuster when you think about what the movie would be up against. RoboCop, Predator, Spaceballs, The Running Man, and that Superman movie we don't like to talk about. 3 adult movies, a spoof, and a highly successful franchise on the verge of self-destruction. Despite debuting at number 3 with a budget of $2 million, the movie only grossed $17.3 million. They obviously had high hopes for the film, so what went wrong? Visually, they put a lot of work into it, and yes, $22 million was not considered a mediocre budget at the time, so they pulled out a lot of stops on this one. No, I don't think aesthetics were its problem. Frank Langella still made one of the scariest villains I've ever seen in any movie, who delivered palpable evil so well considering what he was given to work with. No, it was execution, story, and I fear the reputation of the franchise at large, and this was way before the Village People song became its signature tune.
It's fun to stay at the YMCA. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. They have everything for your men to enjoy. You can hang out with all the boys. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. It's fun to stay at the YMCA.
Frank Langella's excellent portrayal of Skeletor aside, its casting is also a major failing. Whilst I can't fault Dolph Lundgren's physique being perfect for the role of He-Man, unfortunately his acting leaves a lot to be desired. Unfortunately, his wooden counterpart in the animated series offers far more charisma than he does here, and his lines, surprisingly few for the lead character, are so poorly delivered. Again, I can't emphasize this enough, Skeletor just steals the show. The supporting cast and characters are just as disappointing and just as two-dimensional. And yes, I'm going to say it's because everybody's going to expect me to, it falls to very few films in which a cow can seriously out-act the cast. Skeletor versus cow would have been a far more interesting fare than what we were given here. And that's another thing. Why is it just called Masters of the Universe? Seriously, the Nostalgia Critic put it best. It was ironically He-Man that made the TV show. His name is what we looked for as kids in the theme song and the titles. The Masters of the Universe was more of an afterthought, really. Most kids looking for this movie might have missed it altogether if they were fans of the series. He-Man was the man, and if you want to look at him that way, the cement of the very show. And perhaps again that was another one of the film's major flaws. He-Man in this film is nothing more than a supporting character. Again, with so few lines, he had trouble carrying the role for the Guardian of the Universe and overshadowed more by the more than charismatic Skeletor. Now, it's true, in most sci-fi films of the time, the bad guy overshadowed the good guy. Darth Vader, Terminator, Khan. But here it's like He-Man, again, is nothing more than the afterthought as opposed to the bad guys, who, to be quite frank, have no place in a movie about He-Man. Seriously, if we took the Masters of the Universe out of the title and the characters, we'd probably have a halfway decent film and story that we could relate to as an audience.
Ow!
And that's another problem. The audience. Let's face it, unless put in animated form, very few toy franchises of the 80s could have survived the motion picture onslaught. The dilemma for a film of this magnitude should have been obvious. First of all, children. Yes, I'm sorry to say it, but as I said before, the animated series was perhaps a little more juvenile than its peers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The demographic worked for the most part in animated form. But consider, for one moment, turning He-Man into a potential blockbuster would be like turning Dora the Explorer into a box office hit.
Swiper, no swiping.
Oh, man.
Okay, bad example. But seriously, you see the problem. Sadly, very few kids' movies make the big bucks short of E.T. in the theatres, and the Masters of the Universe suffered from two major problems. First of all, as I said before, it was based on largely a popular toy range. Good in theory for money, but in the long term not so great for a box office income when drawing in the adults. And in that fell its second problem. The movie was too scary for the kids who loved the show itself. I'm not kidding. Look at the bad guys, look at the level of comic book violence, and look at the nipples. Whoa! Too much nipple. Let's not look at those again, please. Whoa! Whoa, 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 whoa. Let me at least give myself some pleasure from this film. Chelsea Field's ass. Much better. Though sadly, not a major feature in this movie. I will say this though, that more of that and less of this. And I'm sure the film would have made at least some breaking even in the box office. So I think we can safely assume that the film had a lot going against it. Is it unfair of me to attack the film based on its own merits? Well, taking out the toy franchise, the cartoon source material and the demographic in general, that's where the bag of mixed memories come into play. I've already touched on the visuals. As I said, it can't be denied. It's stunning, it's beautiful, it's spectacular, from the costumes to the makeup to the light shows to the explosions. But sadly, it doesn't help the story. As with the Star Wars prequels, despite their questionable success, they just couldn't make up for poor storytelling. The problem, I think, is that the writers had to create something that appealed to the audience already familiar with the show, but somehow draw in a new audience and keep the adult members of the family enraptured. A family blockbuster is dependent on this. It's how most of the blockbusters survive. Make a foundation for the children, but give enough adult hooks to keep both members of the audience hooked. Look at Toy Story, for example. A film about toys, and yet it managed to keep everyone's interest by maintaining a balance between childish humor and adult innuendo. Also, children could relate to the beauty of playing with toys, and we as adults had a great nostalgia towards our childhood. Unfortunately, Masters of the Universe was too new for any real nostalgia for the adult audience to appreciate. And here is the story's first flaw.